And we're going to move right into the interview. Interview is done by Mike with Robert Ricks. He's the true crime reporter and Fox Nation TV show Freed to Kill. Mike, want to do a little more intro on Robert before we kick off the interview?
Yeah, it's a great story how he took his podcast, True Crime Reporter, and the first season of that got turned into a 5-part miniseries on Fox Nation, which is a streaming service. And it's great. And he is definitely a storyteller, and we'll get on with it. Hello, Robert. Thanks for being on our 300th episode. Holy crud.
What a milestone. Of course, I would expect it from no one other than Blubrry. I'm started with you all. Thank God for y'all to get me off the ground in podcasting.
Yeah, we'd like to, have you tell the story of what, how you got started and, what it's resulted in. We'll get to that, I'm sure. But anyway, yeah, I remember when you first started, I think it started with a phone call. Was that it?
Yes. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure it out. And I will say to your listeners, I shopped around. I've been an investigative reporter for 3 decades, and I don't default to the truth like most people, and I've got a great nose for BS, especially, I covered the White House in my career and politics, and also, boy, I can spot that BS factor in a minute. And it wasn't there with y'all. I've never told you that, but you guys were just real, no dressing up stuff. And I did like the fact that you and Todd are veterans. And, I covered 3 wars, and that really connected to me, too. Went to Texas A&M, which was, a military heritage. So that meant a lot as well. I knew you were disciplined and focused.
We try, for sure. Sometimes we go off the rails, but doesn't everybody?
And you've got great war stories you've shared with me at the conferences. It's just great stuff.
Yeah. You get Todd across the table, and there's some interesting stuff there.
Yeah, but I would have to get my security clearance from my days of working in Congress on a defense committee renewed to get all of his stories.
True.
Yeah.
So anyway, so you started out in television news, as I remember, or at least investigative reporting. I saw some of your old tapes from around Texas on your TV show, which we'll talk about in a bit. But anyway, so how did you get started in media? I mean, I guess that's probably an interesting story.
Well, I got a degree in architecture and construction from Texas A&M University.
Yeah, that's handy.
I went there wanting to fly. My uncle, who I'm named after, had been there in 1943, got called up to the war as the entire class. He had always wanted me to go. And, all my father and all my uncles were World War II veterans, and it really just appealed to me. And that's why I ended up going there. But I got hooked on politics. And there were a group of us in 2 classes. We're all very class conscious by the number of our class. And the class behind me was Rick Perry, who went on to be governor and then energy secretary, ran unsuccessfully for president, and others. John Sharp, who is the chancellor of Texas A&M now, but John was a state senator. He was the railroad commissioner regulating the oil industry in Texas, ran for lieutenant governor. But we all kind of got bit. And so I got elected to the Student Senate. I'd never done anything like that. I was really kind of a shrinking violet in high school, pretty nerdy, and got elected to the Student Senate. Was doing an internship in the state legislature, literally driving 90 miles back and forth between College Station and Austin, Texas. And I got a job in Congress with the member who, it turned out, started the Watergate investigation in the Watergate scandal. And I was a gopher. He had a huge staff. These were the days of the seniority system. I'll give you a little history here. When, if you outlived everybody, you got the chairmanship of the committees. And I arrived. He was chairman like 5 committees. I arrived in May 1972, and he had been elected in 1929.
Holy crud.
He was the dean of the House, and with it went power. And so I arrived, and I met other young men and women that were arriving too. to do the same thing, and they all worked with senior members, and we were all at the bottom of the pyramid. And here I've got a 5-year degree in architecture and everything, and I'm basically a gopher. I get there, but they started that investigation, and I had a knack for digging. In those days, if you wanted to find out something, you had to go to the Library of Congress, and in the bowels of this thing, where there were card files, literally thousands of card files, and you had to dig through them to try to find then the book, the magazine, whatever the article you're looking for. Or if you want something as simple as an 8K from the Securities and Exchange Commission, today I just type in a few keystrokes and boom, it's on my computer. You literally had to go to the SEC headquarters and go into their archives and pull the paper copy and make a copy. It's very time consuming, but I had a knack for it. And that really took me eventually to a defense committee that he was chairman of. And I, young guy, and became an investigator. I loved the military anyway from coming out of A&M. Mm-hmm. And I was assigned to deal with the press because there was a lot of attention. Everybody in that committee was from naval intelligence and the CIA. They wanted nothing to do with the press. Their entire DNA and training had been, you don't talk to the press. But since I worked for the chairman, I'm the young guy and all, and I kind of got it. I'd been around it. I did it. And I really came to respect in those days what they did. I dealt with the Wall Street Journal and Washington Post, New York Times, and the television networks. And I really became acquainted with Bob Schieffer of CBS News. Later, he was the anchor for Face the Nation and also CBS Evening News when there was a transition. But Bob was the congressional correspondent covering Capitol Hill. And he was from Fort Worth. I'm from Dallas. And we Texans, we have that kind of immediate bond when we meet each other. And I got to know him. And then Mr. Patman, Wright Patman, is who I worked for. I think there's even some stuff on streaming now about Watergate, and he's in it. He passed away. And, that's your godfather. They leave, you're done because there's another chairman coming in with his own team. So I left that, and I went out and worked in a presidential campaign and really came back just trying to figure out what are you going to do with the rest of your life? But I knew I really had liked that and digging. And I went to see Bob Schieffer, and Schieffer helped me do my first audition tape, pointed me kind of in the right direction and great counsel. And that got me started in television. And I started way up the chain. Usually people started in small market, Lubbock, Texas, Abilene, Texas, where
Traverse City, Michigan.
Sure. If you made a mistake, there weren't a lot of people watching. But fortunately for me, I started up in a large market covering politics in the legislature in New York. And suddenly, the Texan who had a twang in those days is in New York City. So, but that's what got me going. And I ended up doing everything. I ran a Washington bureau and was a Washington correspondent. Then I covered the Reagan White House. I covered George H.W. Bush's White House, the Pentagon, the State Department, Capitol Hill, everything, and up and down, lived out of a suitcase up and down the East Coast, covered my share of disasters, came back to Texas because we were starting a family and I was burned out. I mean, it takes a toll on you.
Oh, yeah. You're on the road all the time. And
yes.
It's a lot of work.
And so one of my friends, there was a whole group of us that had gravitated each other, had become friends. One of my friends was Larry Speaks. Larry became the press secretary for President Reagan. He was deputy press secretary. But when Brady was wounded in the assassination attempt on President Reagan by Hinckley, he was incapacitated. And Larry became, in fact, the press secretary, but he kept the title of deputy out of respect for Brady. Mm-hmm. And, I think he got up at 4 every morning and went to bed after 10 p.m. I mean, it's grueling. It is grueling. And it was sort of the same on us. And after a while, you're just tired. And that brought me back to Texas. And I covered the state legislature for a big station group here. And really started doing investigative reporting. I'd done some investigative reporting in New York, won some awards. And then I really started digging in here more. And that led me, I thought I was coming to relaxed Austin, Texas, which was interesting in those days. The members of the legislature and the press, we typically wore jeans, sport coats, dress shirts, and cowboy boots. Really laid back. But there was an epidemic of violent crime in the state. And since I was new to the state, I thought, well, what is going on here? And I think that the rest of the press corps and a lot of people had just become kind of anesthetized to it. They just didn't see it anymore. And that caused me to start digging into how are they getting out? Because when you looked at it, these were senseless stranger on stranger crimes, and boy, they were outrageous, and they were making the headlines and evening news everywhere. And at first I thought, well, there's an old adage in journalism, tabloids, if it bleeds, it leads. And I thought it was some of that. But then when you started looking at it, it was like, my God, what is happening? And there was a young member of the Senate, about 3 years older than me, who was a chairman of the Criminal Justice Committee. And he too was wondering, what is going on here? And I started digging, and he was digging around, and I discovered that more than 60 former death row inmates had been paroled out of prison. Their sentences had been commuted to life in 1972 when the Supreme Court overturned the death penalty. And now they were out. And and I started reporting on that. And I reported that, one of these people was a guy named Kenneth Allen McDuff, notorious serial killer. And he was out. So I'm going to come back to this in a minute. It'll make sense. So I covered what turned out to be corruption in the parole system and some of the prison system in Texas for nearly 10 years. And then I turned to terrorism. I went to CBS and really concentrated on terrorism. I was embedded in the invasion of Iraq in 2003 with a lead unit. And I had done the Gulf War as well. And I also done the Contras in Latin America, Nicaragua and Honduras. And, that became the focus. The crime stuff was kind of in the rear view mirror. And I've always been a storyteller. I just love telling stories. I mean, it's
Well, that's a typical podcaster too. Podcast didn't exist when you started telling stories.
So my colleagues and I, for instance, when I came to Texas and I started the same day, Scott Telly, who became the anchor of the CBS Evening News, started that day. And we were all driven by one, kind of telling the truth, trying to tell people what really was going on that was affecting their lives. And we just loved telling stories. That was it. I'd grown up in a family of storytellers. There were horsemen in East Texas. And literally as a kid, on a screen porch, rock men in the rocking chairs, telling stories. It's just, and I really think it affected me. And I thought maybe I was unique in that sense, but along my career, I met other reporters. I mean, there's a friend of mine who was a Pulitzer Prize winner out of Philadelphia. Same thing. He'd grown up around storytellers in his family, and it just so like how, God got into him. And, I had this, I'll diverge here. I had this great uncle, and we had a ranch, a big horseman and stuff. And all these men were in cowboy hats and boots. And at night, he would sit on the screen porch, all the men around, and dark, and you'd hear the crickets and the bullfrogs and the little lake by everything. And then you would start hearing his packs of beagles barking in the distance onto something. and he would start narrating what was happening. And it was mesmerizing. He would be calling out the dogs by name, and he's jumping over this log, and now they've cornered the raccoon in this tree, and he was just making it up. You know, you heard the dogs, and so that was really had an impact on my life. All of these men were great storytellers. They were children and also men of the Depression, and they talked about that, told the stories from that, which were fascinating. They were all World War II veterans. They never discussed the war. It was taboo. Never came up. Nothing. Wasn't a subject for discussion. But the Depression, hard times, and how they survived, they loved talking about it. So that's really kind of got into me. And in 2008, the recession blew up journalism, broadcast, and newspapers as we know it. And we also had the internet growing. And gosh, in one day, CBS laid off a couple of thousand people. I mean, closed bureaus around the world. You know, I was high paid, big benefits, you know, that put you at the top of the list. But this went on at all the networks. Everybody was cut. Everybody was on the street. I had 2 kids in college, and you're like in a house with a bigger mortgage payment than I should have ever taken on.
Yeah, that happens.
Oh, that happens. You know, if you're listening, you're young, don't buy it off. You know, don't. A lot of people kind of live according to their salary. Don't do that. Don't do that. I've told my kids, live small. Live small.
Yeah, if you live on as little as possible, you know, and be comfortable, of course, but you start making the big bucks, don't, you know, that gets you in trouble because you're not going to maybe not make that all the time.
Oh, and it can go away. So my wife today, she compares life to the days of TV money. And TV, you know, you're on air like I was. You were handsomely paid. I mean, it was really handsomely paid. That you don't even get that anymore. And then she compares it to the post TV days of, you know, hustling, gigging, you know,
right,
consulting clients and stuff. But I had a very popular. I've always been a nerd at heart. I had a blog at CBS on terrorism. I'd come back from the war, and I had a great producer, and I said, you know, we're gonna blog about terrorism. Now this is 2003. You know, Google is just kind of coming on the scene, and the CBS executives, you know, when I said I was doing this, they all got upset and were like, wait, we're in television. What are you talking about? I said, well, there's an audience way beyond the broadcast towers around the country, and they were furious about it. They were adamant. You know, what are you talking about? Wasting time. I still went ahead and did it. I didn't tell anybody. And in those days, all of the television stations in the CBS group, their websites, they just gave away ads on there, display ads for car dealers. It's just kind of, hey, here's a little bonus. We'll throw that on there. They didn't even think about money or anything.
Yeah. I worked at a local station around that time, and the website was an afterthought for them.
Sure, and I think your listeners, if you're young, you're going to be like, "What? You're kidding me?" And so then I started finding out, okay, how do we get found? And I found out about there was this thing called SEO or something, and I literally myself went to Google, and because I learned that none of these stations' websites were really getting indexed by Google. And you could see Google was the player coming on. And so I talked them. I worked into indexing the website I'd be using. I worked for the station group. I was in Dallas, but because it was the group, my stories would appear, you know, all over the country, New York, wherever there's a CBS-owned station.
Yep.
And we built in these days, it was easy to game the algorithm. You know, use keyword stuffing and all those things that you cannot do today. They wised up.
They'll smack you for that.
Yeah. And we built an enormous worldwide audience. I mean, good God, maybe 30,000 followers in key intelligence agencies and defense departments around the world and stuff. And again, you know, we were telling stories, loved telling our stories. And then we were doing other investigative reporting. So with that knowledge, when I got blown out, I hung out my shingle as a digital media internet consultant and worked with personal injury lawyers.
That's a euphemism for unemployed.
Yes, it is. But I was able to pay for health insurance and kids' college and, you know, stay alive. It wasn't the money of TV days. But I still kept thinking, you know, can I get back to journalism somehow? Is there another way to, you know, you can survive in this day and age? And I wanted to tell stories. And so just as a test, I threw, more than 200 stories from my career, a variety of stuff up onto YouTube. And I didn't optimize it. I put my name in the title of everything because I wanted to be found for work and stuff. And people started, as podcasting was coming along, and I liked the idea of podcasting. I really began studying it because in television, you had a crew and that camera gear and all that stuff. And I always called it my 500-pound pencil to get around.
Yeah.
You know, my print colleagues always just had their spiral reporter's notebook, but I had to have all this other. And I like the idea that, you know, I could just take 2 microphones and a recorder somewhere, and preferably into people's homes, because I knew as a reporter, people drop the barriers when they're in their home or if they're in a place comfortable. And they don't have that lens staring them in the face. So that eases kind of the tension that exists when that lens is there and the lights are glaring. And
cameras are more intimidating than microphones, I've found.
Oh, so much. That microphone goes away pretty fast if you really engage them. But that other stuff, lights blaring and everything else, that's there. So I liked the appeal, but it was like, okay, well, what am I going to do? And my first thought was, you know, I really ought to do something from my military experience, covering wars and everything, all this bang bang and stuff like that, and guys and all. And my wife was on me, no, you did 10 years in some of the biggest crime stories of the nation and all these other events you did. You know, the FBI was asking you to serve on panels. That's what you need to go do it. You need to look at true crime. Well, I looked at the numbers in YouTube and I thought the stuff from the war, tanks blowing stuff up, I thought that'll be it. No, my reports from like inside the prison system, during prison riots, other stuff, I had 500,000 views for videos. I mean, it was unbelievable. Millions of views.
Yeah, true crime's a big deal in, you know, all media, but
yes,
you know, it's just, you know, in podcasting, it takes off. Of course, your show, True Crime Reporter, sort of led to a lot of other things in other mediums. So that's.
And when I saw that, I thought, oh, the audience has spoken. I did love doing this. And I'll say, you know, I wish I had done this earlier. You know, and what I did, I started before the pandemic kicked in, and I was bootstrapping it off, you know, my consulting clients, you know, using that income to do this, made the days long. And I started, and I wrote a business plan. I mean, and I went out and studied. I found academic studies about true crime. Who listens? Why do they listen? Found it was 80% women. And why they're motivated and what they like to hear and that sort of stuff. And one of the things they told me is that they can't get enough about serial killers. And I had one of those in my back pocket. And I literally, and I used to say this when I first started the podcast, is that, you know, I pulled out my old reporter's notebooks and my law enforcement sources sat down with me to talk, and it's a journey into darkness. But I did pull back. I mean, my gosh, I have so many stories. And I fortunately kept files. And in many cases, I kept audio tape, from a cassette. In those days, you carry a cassette recorder. So I still had full interviews that were mine. And I decided to focus on the the killer I mentioned earlier, Kenneth McDuff, because it had been a story like no other story. And with the business plan, I suggest if you're thinking about doing this, and it's not just going to be a hobby, that you want to try to find some career path out of it, you really need to sit down and think about whether it's a business or whatever, is who is my audience and what I have to tell them that's important to them, that affects them in some way. And of course, I'm on the entertainment sort of news side spectrum. And I did a lot of thinking and I did a lot of writing about it. I wrote a long business plan of how we would try to monetize this. And about, one was, of course, the obvious ads. 2, trying to find branded sponsors. 3, spinning off books, those type of things. And about 5th down the list was on a prayer. Maybe this could be television. Because the one thing that I saw is that a podcast would give a television producer at one of the networks an opportunity to hear the characters and the story arc. They could hear it. They could hear, are they authentic and what is this story? The typical way the industry has worked for the Netflixes, Amazons, Hulu, Roku, all those, is that it's a written pitch. And the pitch will break down, it's a synopsis, it'll break down episodes, it will list out the characters. But the thing that's missing, the guts of it, is that, well, what do these people sound like? What are they like?
Yeah. And, the thing about audio in general is it's a much more intimate thing. If you're watching TV, you get distracted and all this stuff. A lot of times people got these things in their ears, or they're driving in their car, where they don't have the distraction, so they can actually listen to it, and it kind of, you get the vibe from it where you wouldn't from a written piece.
That's the thing that I really like about podcasting. You literally get in somebody's brain. I've even gone out there and read brain research to find out what's going on. And, television is you're in a passive mode, where coming into someone's ears and head is more engaging, and you can really pull them in. And usually there's not distractions going on. They're really tuned in. So that's something that really appealed to me. But on the television side of things, the other thing, the networks want a 3-5 minute sizzle reel. Just let us see them and stuff. Well, here it was. I had the audio, and the way this gets turned into a television show. But I can't emphasize more that one of the reasons that happened is network. Your network of friends and people in business. If you're younger and starting out, I lectured at Texas A&M, and I hammer home, start building a network now. Get on LinkedIn, other stuff. Yep. Start those connections. You never know where that's going to lead. Start building your reputation, your personal brand now. And so in my case, I was the benefactor of 3 decades on television and being known, and a big LinkedIn profile. And I announced on LinkedIn that I was going to start this podcast. And I had people that I knew who they were out in television in the industry. I wasn't friends with them, acquainted with them. They felt like they knew me from TV, and they began contacting me, and we'd like to work with you and stuff. And then the son of young minted college. I'm not out of college that long. Of a television executive that knew me, that I'd worked with years ago. He contacted me, and he'd listened to the podcast had come out, and he was listening, and he had become a development person at a big production company. And what they do is they look for and develop television shows to sell to the channels, and they distribute. They're big distributors overseas. And he, and I'll back up a minute. So I launched off this podcast. I'm bootstrapping, and two things just clobbered me. One, defund the police hit. And I had an agent that we were trying to sell the podcast to, a big sponsor or get on, big promotion in some of the big channels. And, that was going well, and defund the police hit, and nobody wanted anything where law enforcement looked responsible, heroic, professional,
Yeah.
I mean, one network even said, can you dig up some corrupt cops? So that goes south, and the pandemic hit, and suddenly in the space of a week, my clients were all law clients, and I lost all of them in a week because the courthouse is closed. And now we were in a rock and a hard place. And fortunately, my wife works as a teacher, and that, could keep us alive. And so I just looked, I've got time on my hands. I'm doing the podcast. I'm getting this thing out. And by the 6th episode, and there were 17 episodes about Kenneth McDuff, the serial killer. By the 6th episode, this young executive, his name was Max Montoya. He's at a company called Big Media TV, bigmedia.tv. You can Google them. Yep. They got shows everywhere, Netflix, Amazon, you name it. He contacted me about it, and he got the president of the company to listen. And they called me, and the president said, I got to tell you something. I get inundated in here with people, pitching shows, and I've even had people podcast and stuff. And I never pay attention to it, but my God, I've been listening. I'm hooked. I'm hooked. And he started asking me detailed questions about the episodes, the first 6. And I thought, okay, this guy's real. And he said, hey, we want to work with you. We want to try to take this to television. So we worked out what's called a co-production agreement. And we ended up, so they take it and sell it. They literally are all over the world, international buyers, what have you, but they've got to sell it. And they did. And they sold it to Fox Nation Streaming. Fox Nation Streaming was just kind of coming on, really looking for content. They wanted true crime content, but they wanted authenticity. And this is something that was starting to happen in Netflix and the others. These producers were hearing, look, we want the real people that have been there. They've done it. They're not just, a narrator or something. We're finding with our audiences, they want to know if this is a documentary style. These guys and women know what they're doing. They speak of what they've been. So that ended up being a big plus for us. So Fox commissioned 5 episodes about this serial killer, and we went to work. I'm the voice or the storyteller that strings all the episodes together. I'm on camera, and
especially like you driving around in your car while you're doing it. That was cool.
and I'm an executive producer. But let me just tell you, I had done guest correspondent work for Nightline with Ted Koppel. I'd had a piece on 60 Minutes. And those are big productions. I had done documentaries, news documentaries out on Navy aircraft carriers and stuff. But when you go to Netflix or these big channels, Fox Nation, it's a whole nother level of the the number of people involved, the standards and quality of what it's got to look like and how good it's got to be. And thus there are a lot of people involved. So you've got to be for a team player. And fortunately, I came up through news working with a team. There are lots of people behind that camera supporting Robert. And so that served me well in this.
Yes.
And we had a vision. There was a showrunner assigned to me. Now, a showrunner is the liaison between and manager of everything taking part, all the shoots, everything, and the liaison to the network, liaison to all the producers. They're the traffic cop. It's a tough job. And they also have the visionary, and they'll be there during the interviews. My agreement on this was that I will sit in the chair. I will do the interviews. I will bring everyone together that's needed to tell the story. And I cast a much wider net than I did for the podcast. I brought together a lot of people. So you got a complete story from the victims, families, all of the detective and investigators involved, and the key legislator who brought change to everything. So you got the whole gamut of everything. It premiered on Fox Nation in March of this year, 2022. And again, I should have said earlier, it's a spinoff from True Crime Reporter.
Right.
The shooting, the movie making, and it literally is making a movie. The crew would come in from all parts. They're all freelancers. For 10 days, we'd shoot day and night. Then everybody go back and you kind of digest what all has been done, and the other writing is going on and stuff, and putting it all back together. And that was a 10-month process to finally getting it on the air. And in the meantime, we were trying to do the podcast, and then finally it's kind of overwhelmed us, and we went on hiatus. And then I got a grip on things, was able to get the podcast going again. And we have kind of expanded the podcast. I mean, I'm now kind of looking at the podcast really hasn't made any significant money. Let me just say that up front. We are just now doing something. We're going to have ads in the podcast. Mm-hmm. But one of the things as I looked at the podcast was that, and I think we're all facing this, how do you get discovered? I realized even for these television shows at these channels, discovery, and look at, Netflix, good God, they lost 220,000 subscribers, took their stock down and stuff. It's all about attention. How do you get them there? How do you hold them there? And I even found out in this world of streaming television, your success is judged by how many people got to that final and fifth episode to the end. Did you hold them all the way through? And we actually, a writer that worked with us, the showrunner named Seth Eisler. Seth has been on Broadway. He's been on both sides of the camera, everything. And we really, and a really talented editor worked out techniques to do that. So there was always a cliffhanger at the end that would bring you back. You really wanted to see the next thing. We built in moments, and you should do this in a podcast. I did this in the podcast as well. I could have done a better job of it. Now I look back after I really thought about it for television, but it's about how do you keep them coming back? And we recommended, and Fox followed our recommendation, to drop all 5 episodes, they're an hour long, at once, and let people binge watch, because we thought it was a binge worthy deal.
Yeah, my wife and I, we started it and didn't stop it till it was done. I mean, it was that good.
Yeah. But I think you got to apply those same principles to your podcast.
Oh, yeah. You got to keep them coming back, always promo what's next or whatever,
And you've always got to be kind of testing and listen to what your audience is telling you, what they're saying in social and other things. So we did a test, and I'm gonna look. It's tough doing these alone if it's just. Yeah. And so we did some tests with a former U.S. prosecutor named Bill Johnston, who is in the TV show. And Bill and I hadn't talked to each other in, good Lord, 25 years or something until I interviewed him for the podcast about McDuff. And then he's in the show, and we did some tests together, and women said, we love the two of you together. Your interplay, he's a prosecutor, I'm the reporter, and we break down and do police procedural. So now some of these episodes now are Bill and I, and the podcast really has in some sense become sort of our intellectual property test for television. We now have 2 more shows in development, a third looking very positive that's about to be sold. And fortunately for us, I think a lot of podcasters are always like struggling. Where's my next story coming from? We are inundated with it. I've had every Texas Ranger in the state, as well as many of them retired, connect to me on LinkedIn. Hey, Robert, I'm close to retirement. Could we write a book? Could we be on that podcast? That sort of stuff. So that's great. And we've also spun off another segment under the banner of True Crime Reporter called Texas Ranger Case Files, untold stories of murder, kidnappings, corruption, cold cases. And so 2 of the TV shows we're in development are coming out of that. And the Rangers just kind of welcomed us with open arms because they don't talk. It's not in their DNA. They stand in the back. And we started telling some stories that had never been told. And it really hooked them, and it's hooked our listeners. So, but that tells you how you've really got to have your social networks, business networks, and all. You have to be out there places where you can listen and get feedback. And we didn't have that in television, and that's the beauty of this. They're going to be haters. You got to ignore the haters.
Oh, of course. Yeah, no matter what you do, if you get at all famous at it, there's always going to be the haters. You'll find that on YouTube a lot. The real famous YouTubers, they have the stalkers too. That are messing with them all the time, and that doesn't happen as much in podcasting that I've found, but it does.
So the other struggle that I know all of us have, as I was saying earlier, even the networks, is discovery.
Yeah.
There is so much competition for attention. I mean, you can think about your own life. So much competition. How do I get discovered? How do I get found? And we've initially and stuff, we've done some very, very targeted Facebook advertising. We knew how to do that economically just because of our expertise over the years with our consulting. But even that has become Zuckerberg is
there's a lot of competition on that kind of stuff.
And so I began to realize that I got to have help. I got to find the right partner, something. And for our listeners here, I would recommend, on this discovery issue, you go to a website called Spark Toro, Toro, Spark Toro. And the entrepreneur, the genius behind it is Rand Fishkin. Rand was one of the top gurus of SEO back in the day. Brilliant. He'll tell you that's gone. The only way you're coming up in the top of search results is you're paying Google and everybody lots and lots of money. I don't know if you know it. You may have 10,000 Facebook fans. We're close to that, but I can only reach with a post 0.05% of it.
Yeah, it's the algorithms will keep you out of it.
Because Mark owns them. Zuckerberg owns them, and Zuckerberg wants you to pay him to reach your own fans. Yeah. So you've got to find other places you can control. You better have your own website. And most importantly, you better be collecting emails. That's something that we did at the beginning that we started doing with the thought someday of building a community, because I own that. That's us. We have that.
Yeah, we preach that here on this show all the time about, you build your own brand. Don't build somebody else's brand.
So I'm a native of East Texas, and there was a thing here called sharecropping. Mm-hmm. And growing up as a kid, I saw these poor whites and poor blacks just ripped off. They'd go out and farm somebody else's property and never really see it, never have anything to show for it. And then
that's a great analogy.
The landowner could kick them off, and they did kick them off. Or they would borrow money from the landowner. Don't be a sharecropper. Don't build your house on somebody else's property.
That's a great analogy for sure. For because you look at YouTube. There's people on YouTube making millions of bucks, but YouTube could say, you're done."
Yeah. So here's what Rand Fishkin is saying. And you can find Rand's webinars on YouTube, Spark Toro. And I'm telling you, I've known him for years. I've watched his work, followed him when we were doing SEO. The man is brilliant. And what he is preaching now about discovery is that you have got to find, first off, you got to find where is your audience? Where do they live? And they have built a tool for doing that is absolutely amazing. And if I can put out, I want to find people talking about serial killers, and it will begin to find the publications or the magazines or the books. And what Rand preaches now is that you have got to go become a part of that audience somewhere. And it's somebody, whether an influencer or old media, and get yourself somehow in front of that audience. And that's what he preaches. And that's what we began pursuing, because there's, there are podcasters. I've run into cases. I've heard of podcasters spending $50,000 a month on promotion.
We know of one that he advertises in other podcasts. And
well, we don't have those bucks. And what a risky venture too. So we have done a thing where we have a licensing agreement with Southern Cross Austereo, SCA, in Australia and New Zealand. They're a big entertainment company. They've got 110 radio stations. They're moving into podcasting. And they found me through a venture capitalist that was helping them make this move. And the timing could have been more perfect, because I realized, look, we have got to have partners like this that, look, I'll produce it and we'll split the revenue. You distribute it. You've got the audience. And so we're trying to do more of that. We're trying to do it overseas, because one of the things I found in our market is that true crime is very saturated in this country. And there's so many people that think they can do it.
Yeah.
But it's not that way so much overseas. And the other advantage to have that I began to realize is that we're Texas. And when I was a correspondent working overseas, I always introduced myself as being from Dallas, Texas. I'm a Texan, not the United States, because the U.S. was not popular. But Texas, they have that iconic image that we're horsemen, we're cowboys, oil, and, roughnecks and what have you. And so I always did that. And I am a horseman. My wife and I are horse people. And I would pull out in my wallet, I'd flash it, or on the phone, I'd flash a picture of me on horseback, or both of us. And they would just fall over. They'd be stunned, oh my God, you really are. And so we know the popularity of that. And then when we started doing this Texas Rangers segment, the Rangers asked Bill and I to become host of their bicentennial in 2023 here. The Texas Rangers are the oldest serving law enforcement agency in North America, maybe most of the world. They even preceded the Republic. And they asked us to join the host committee with President Bush and Ross Perot. And I looked at him and said, I don't have $100,000 to give you to be on your host committee. And they were like, oh, no. We love the podcast. We want to put your logo for True Crime Reporter and Texas Ranger case files on it. And so as we got involved in that, we began to meet the official sponsors of the 2023 bicentennial. Like there's official whiskey, and they're raising money for scholarships for Rangers kids and also for Rangers that have health issues from being wounded or something like that. And I was at one of the events, and I was talking to one of the big apparel manufacturers, and the president is there with his cowboy hat on and everything. And I said, hey, I've got an event coming up. I need a cowboy hat for it. I don't have a cowboy hat. Could I get one in a couple of weeks like that? And he went, nope. I said, well, how long do you think? He said, a year. I said, a year? Is this a supply line issue? And he said, no, this is a Yellowstone issue. And so the popular series Yellowstone, if you're watching it out there, it's done by a Texan, Taylor Sheridan, and he's spun off more from it. He told me it set off an international craze for all things Western. And, Yellowstone may be set up in Montana or Wyoming, but if you got a cowboy hat on, everybody thinks you're from Texas. And then he began saying, look, Robert, your podcast needs to be in Germany. It needs to be in France. It needs to be in Spain. It needs to be in Italy. These are where we're seeing this stuff go. So that certainly gave me audience insight into things. And so we have been sort of turning our graphics to a more Western feel of who we are, because our stories really are Texas based. I like to say everything's bigger in Texas, especially the crime. And I saw that in journalism. There's something about here, crazy crimes. And so that's kind of the mine of gold, where we dig and put our pick to and pan for is Texas. That's our thing. So, we're embracing it more. And so for podcasters listening, always be thinking about your brand, your audience. How does it fit? What are they looking for? Even for, back SEO, what gets the click? What gets the click? And the more we studied it, the big search term out there is not true crime. It's serial killer. And if you want the mother of all true crime search terms is, you got to guess?
No, go ahead.
Ted Bundy.
Really? He's still...
Oh, my God. Hundreds of thousands of searches. Ted Bundy. So guess what? I did an episode, the Ted Bundy's in the title, because one of my friends is the reporter who got the original interviews with Ted Bundy and wrote the first book about Ted Bundy. It was in prison, in jail, interviewed him in jail, got 150 hours worth of interviews that became in 2019 a show on Netflix. So you put serial killer in the title, Ted Bundy in the title, what sort of stuff, murder. And you have to think about these things as a podcaster, because you've got to be discovered. And if you're doing a business, something related to business, you need to know what is that, what are the problems that audience is trying to solve. You need to have those terms in the title, and certainly your episode needs to be about it, not about you.
Yeah.
But so, we bring homicide detectives in and cold case detectives, and if you listen, it's not about Bill and I. We will pull out of them from our experience the story.
Yeah, and that's the trick is, you
yeah,
do your tell your story and all that. But so we better wrap this up. We're running pretty long here, and I think you got a little cough going on there, but we'll edit that out.
I'll try to edit that out. I got a bug in my throat. Hold on. So, Mike, I have been asked to speak at Podcast Movement here in Dallas in August on a new stage they've got called the Startup Stage, about how did an independent podcaster take a podcast to television
Right. That's I was going to mention that. I saw the announcement the other day, so you're going to be there. We'll be there, of course, as well.
And I so look forward to seeing y'all. And hey, I'm going to buy the Tex-Mex or the barbecue ribs. And if you want to,
I'm a brisket guy.
Okay, I know the place. It's a hole in the wall, but if one of you want to become a real Texan and get on one of our horses, maybe Mackenzie might want to do that. We'll take you to the barn.
Yeah, there you go.
But I look forward to talking to everybody. I think there are a lot of people that it is their dream to spin it off. And I think Tiger King, my wife tells me, started as a podcast and became that television show. But I will tell you this, it is hard work. I have an advantage because I spent 3 decades in television where, you're on air multiple times a day. You're turning out stories. So I understand the demands of production, and it's hard. I mean, it's hard, and we're trying to get to a point to do more than 1 episode a week,
right?
And make money.
Yeah, and the thing is with podcasters, the money isn't always the podcast itself. It's a way of getting your foot in the door in other places. And a lot of people make their money, with other things, and the podcast is marketing and or just recognition or, so. A lot of things happen because of podcasting. I wouldn't be in this job if I didn't start a podcast 17 years ago,
And I think that is one of the bigger values of doing a podcast. It is about getting in the head of potential customers with information that will help them solve their problems so they start to recognize you as an expert. What I'm doing is very different because I'm on the entertainment side. And you've got to have these other things to make money out of it. I mean, we're for instance, we're working on books. We're working on a comic book. We're working on an NFT, all kind of leveraging all this content we've got from the podcast and how do we make money in other places off of it.
True crime comic book, huh? I'm having a hard time conceptualizing that.
Oh, well, listen, I've been meeting with some guys they're musicians and artists, and they've already got it's called True Crime Comic.
Oh, wow.
And it's an animated talking comic book. It's amazing. And there's a growing interest in fiction for podcast, and we've created a superhero Texas Ranger that's fiction that we're looking at trying to do a comic book around, as well as other stuff. The podcast, we put up one episode as an experiment.
Right, you're doing multiple podcasts, as I remember it. Not a ton of different ones, but so yeah, kind of give us the rundown. What shows are currently are you publishing?
All of our effort now. We had one called SWAT Brothers, where we had SWAT guys coming in, and those that we have put on the back burner. We are putting all of our effort, energy, and money into True Crime Reporter because it's turning out television shows. So there is one that I'm working on the launch on Blubrry, and it's a result of listening to audience. I have lost count of the number of emails I've received, messages posted of our listeners saying, Robert, I love your voice. Could you do something? Can you read something to help me relax or go to sleep with? And then I noticed that they're putting Voices in Calm, the app. And so I thought, the audience is speaking. And so I'm working on doing that. I've bought a domain called Soothing Storyteller. Stories to sleep and relax by. And I'm reminded, and I started doing, again, I'm a reporter, DNA, I research. And I went back digging. Do you remember that artist? He was usually on maybe PBS or something, Bob, that would do the painting and talk about the painting. And,
I got a story about him, by the way.
well, do you know that most people listened for the calming effect of that smooth voice of his?
Bob Ross was his name.
Yes.
And he was a master sergeant in the Air Force for 20-something years. The stories I heard from people that worked with him in the Air Force was that he was nothing like that when he was in the military, and he did the painting stuff to sort of counteract his true self.
Oh, so he was a whirling dervish in the military, huh?
That's what I hear.
Oh, well, so I did some research into that show, and I thought there is something here. And then I've done some other research about tonal values and how low tones affect the brain. So I thought, they've spoken. We're going to try that out.
Yeah.
But that's, again, you can't do that anywhere except, I think, a podcast. And it's so, in one respect, low cost. I started with 2 Rode microphones and a Tascam. That's the entire first season was done with that. I could just go into, I set at investigators' dining room tables. And now, of course, we have a studio, we video and again, but, with what equipment is, I mean, this studio, good God, back in the day, this would have been tens of thousands of dollars.
You can just get it all in one box now.
Yeah, and we've jerry-rigged stuff together economically. And that's the other really appealing thing about this. But don't lose sight of who your audience is. Yep. And it's, there's some business podcasts that I like, and then the hosts have become full of themselves, and they go on these binges that they'll talk with their guest about, we were here and we went to eat in New York City at this restaurant. I'm like, get to what I need to learn. Come on, guys, put your egos in your back pocket. Stop it.
Yeah. Yeah. Podcasters in general, though, do like to talk about themselves. So it's one of those things. And, to that end, I have a podcast that's all it is just me, but, I don't get a lot of listeners, and it's just therapy. It's fun. So,
well, and one thing, again, learn as you go. We learned, and I was doing research as well, we learned that our open was really too long. In the beginning, I had the thing about, getting my reporters' notebooks out and all this sort of stuff. And as we looked at attention spans and how people are pressed, we thought, I need to get to the story. So now typically we do what I call a cold open. It's a really strong, intriguing soundbite from the guest. Mm-hmm. And then boom, I say who the guest is, introduce myself, little music interlude, and bam, my intro, and then we're into it.
Very good. Well, thanks for being on. And like I said, you can find Robert at truecrimereporter.com, I believe.
Yes, truecrimereporter.com. And we love Blubrry. If you're listening to this, you're trying to pick a company, they're it. Unfortunately for geolocating around the world, I had to go to another hosting company for True Crime Reporter. However, I've learned from these guys that what a crazy business this can be. And so True Crime Reporter is also still on Blubrry.
Yeah.
Just in case we get crossways or all with the other group, I still own it. I still have it. I'm still protected.
Yeah, you're still a happy customer, and we appreciate that for sure.
Well, I appreciate you for your support, your counsel, your friendship, and how you have guided me, and you've contributed to the success, all of you.
Like I said, we appreciate you, and thanks for being on the show. And we'll and show 300. I gotta keep saying that because it's a milestone.
It's a hard number to reach. I appreciate it. Thank you.